Good day, everyone. Thanks for tuning in again. Today, we are going to take a look at building out the form functionality. And before we do, I just want to go and grab this header from the form and just give it a margin bottom of 2 rems, just so we can get a little bit more air between the header and the form. But having done that, let's take a look at the research component. So right now, it's not carrying any state at all. And ideally, what we want is that the data for the research component should come from the stock view. So if you remember, in stock view, we are setting the specific stock. And we are doing that from the mock data object that we created. So what we need to do first and foremost is we want to grab the stocks in the data object and we want to modify that to carry the research. So let's go to data.js, and for each stock, what we're going to do is we're going to add a research property, and that's going to be an array, and we'll have to model a specific research card here. So let's take a look at how we've already modeled it. And we're going to go to the research component. And here we can see that we have a title, a description, a link, and an author. So let's go ahead and put that in. So we'll go ahead and just grab these values and we'll say title, first research, and we'll say description. We'll copy this and we'll put that in there, and then we'll have the link. We'll copy the link, and then we'll have the author. So that'll be a property as well. And probably we'll have some kind of author ID, and we'll have an ID here as well. All right. So we need to add this to all of our stocks. And I mean, in real life, they would have, once they come from an API, they will have their own data. But for now, we're just going to duplicate it. So, okay, now all of our stocks has a research property, which means that we can go to our stock view and we can make sure that inside of the route here, we want to give the research component the stocks.research or stock.research. So to do that, we need to swap from component to render, and we need to pass a function that returns the research component. And now we can pass research as stock.research. And if we go to our research component now, we can destructure research. And if we console log that here, we'll find that in our browser, we should be able to have an array where first research, description, and all of the other data that we put into our stock object. But we also have a place here where it's undefined, which means that we have to be careful with how we implement this. So we can't really render this research component before we have the actual research. To fix that, we'll add the research to the initial object here, and that should take care of it. So now we have the empty array, and then once the data is fetched, then we have an array with one object, which is the research object that we added to our data set. All right, so now we need to make sure that these cards are coming from the research prop. So let's go ahead and go to our research component. And here we are receiving the prop. And we want to create a function that renders the research cards. All right, so we're going to return research.map. And what we are going to do is going to take in the research object, and we'll return a research card, and then we'll swap out these titles or these props with the research object's data. So let's go ahead and make sure we do that. And we'll go ahead and we'll say research object.link. We'll give the research object.author. And let's make sure that that's what we called it. Yes. And then the key is going to be the research object ID. All right. And now instead of hard coding this, we are going to put the render research cards method here, and we'll call it. So let's go ahead and see what that gives us. All right, so now we just have one, and that makes sense, but because now it's coming from the research here. So the data that we actually implemented. So if you go to our data.js, it's coming from this property now. So if let's go ahead and find the correct stock. So it's Akir. If we enter that one in our data set, and we added a new object here now, call that the second research, we change the ID and saved, then now we have another set of research here. So let's go ahead and make sure that we can use this form to submit a new piece or a new data object that'll update and be put on the screen here. So let's go ahead and see how we can do that. So first of all, I want to go to research, and I want to import the useState object function from React. And we're going to create 3 different pieces of state here. So we'll say title and set title equals useState empty string. Say source, set source equals useState empty string, and we'll say const description and set description equals useState string. And in our input field for the title, we'll say that the value is going to be equal to title, and the onChange here is going to be equal to a function that takes in the event, and it's going to call set title with the target value. Let's say current targets. And we'll do the same thing for the source. So instead of input value being value, we call it source. And instead of set title, we'll call set source. let's change these properties around so they are similar to the second input. And then for the text area, we'll do something similar, but we'll say text description. And we'll say set description. And let's change this to description as well. So what's it? Value is not defined in research JSX. So somewhere here, so title, not value, but title. All right. So let's go ahead and just log out the title, the source, and the value description. And we'll see what happens in our console when we try to change this. All right, so now we're logging out the title. Here is the source. And then we also need a description. So you can see that the state is updating when we write into these fields. And that's what we want. But now we want to hit add research, we want to clear these fields, and we want to add it to this data. So how can we do that? Let's see. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a handler that's going to trigger when we submit the form. So let's say on submit, and we'll give it create a function, and we'll log out submitting. And then we'll give this to the form as an on submit. And what we want to do is we want to say prevent default, because the default behavior for a form is to perform a full refresh on the page. And that's not what we want. We want to take over the form submit and then collect the data and then perform our own actions. So if we are submitting, then we want to prevent that default behavior, and we want to console log submitting. And let's see in our browser and verify that that actually works. All right, so now it says submitting down here, and that is what we want. So now what we want to do is we want to create a new research object, and that's going to have the title, the source, and the description. And let's just hard code the ID for now to be 100, but that needs to be dynamic. And that's possibly, or that's going to be handled by the API, but for now we are just going to write that out ourselves, and we'll put the author down as Jake. So these last two properties are going to be handled elsewhere. So when we have a user, it will be automatically filled out, and the ID is going to be coming from the API once we kind of post that there. But for now, we're just putting this in here. Because if the ID is the same, it's not going to show up due to React thinking that it's the same object. So that's why we are putting it in. And let's go ahead, and what we want to do is we want to add new research. So where can we do this? Remember, we're in the context of research now. So this component, and we're getting research as a prop. So it means that we have to manipulate the research on a level higher up in the tree. But this component can't create a function to manipulate a function or a component that is higher up in the tree than this one. So what we need to do is we need to go to our research component. Sorry, we need to go to our stock view component, which is the component that is actually passing the data through to the research component. And inside of this component, we need to create a new function called setResearch. And this is going to accept a research object. And we are going to take the setStock function, and we'll take the previous object and we'll spread it out. So we need to wrap this in parentheses to specify that we're actually returning an object here. And we want to take the previous object, which is the entire stock object. So this entire object. And what we're doing is we are copying that over into a new object. And then we want to take the research section and we want to copy over all items from the previous research. So all of the items inside of here, we're taking them out and copying them over to a new array. And then the new research object is going to be appended to the end of that. So now we have a method that allows us to change or manipulate the research array of the current stock. And then if we had an API, obviously we would need to post to the API and update it. But for now, everything is just happening internally in our application. So let's go ahead and take this method and pass it on to the research component. And we'll call it setResearch. And we'll pass that method. And then inside the research component, we're going to destructure the setResearch method. And then we will call it down here and we'll pass the new research object. So now what's happening is we are passing down a function that is actually created in a context where it's able to manipulate the research array. And we are passing the new research object into that function. And it's going to allow us to update the research array with the data that we have written into the form. So let's go ahead and try that out. Say this is a new item. The source is going to be medium, for instance. And we'll say hello world. We'll hit add research. And you can see we get a new item at the bottom of the screen here. And if we hit the source, nothing's happening. So it seems like, I think maybe we named the link incorrectly. So let's go ahead and check that out. Yeah, we call it source and it's actually link. So we'll say link and set link. And then we'll go ahead and swap the source out with link. And set link, and this can also be link. And now let's go ahead. We'll put in the values again. and we'll hit add research, and now we get a new item, and we hit the source, we go to medium.com. All right, perfect. So that means that we're able to use the form to manipulate the research array. For now, it's not getting saved anywhere, but that's something that we'll handle once we actually connect to an API. There might be some few style changes we'll do in this form, but I think that right now we are basically done with the main parts of this application. And the next thing we could do is we could focus on creating an API and connecting that. And then we'll also look at how to deploy this application once it comes to that. So I'd like to thank you again for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next lesson.